Because we're in the practitioner realm now. So what I'm gonna do is from left to right, once again, we've got Chief Todd Schmaderer. He's the Chief of Police for the City of Omaha. Next to him, we have got Dr. Tammy Williams, College of Education for UNO. Next to Tammy, we've got Becky Kern. She's the Warning Coordinator Meteorologist from NOAA and National Weather Service Station out in Valley, Nebraska. Next to Becky, we have Bill O'Neill. Bill is the Executive Director of Strategic Communication at UNMC. Next to Bill, we have Erin Owen. She's the President of Clarity Communication. And next to Erin, we have Jay Martin, who's the Director of School Safety and Security for the Nebraska Department of Education. So please thank them all for being here this morning. So as always, as last time, if you have questions you would like to ask the panel, please run them over to Cheryl. She will write them down, and we will make sure those get up on the mic. So what I'm going to do is kind of left to right for the first one, is I'm just like we did the last panel. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and where you see your area of expertise within this area of risk and crisis comms. So Todd, we'll start with you.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Schmaderer. I've been Chief of Police for the City of Omaha for the last 12 years. I was on the job probably now about 28 years in total, last 12 as Chief. During that time in Chief, we've seen a lot of things happen in Omaha. When you talk about crisis communication, I've probably done 25 live press conferences where they break into TV and they show what you're doing on there. So when I look at my career, I look at where's my experience lie, why am I a subject matter expert? One, I think just 12 years worth puts me as the longest serving major city chief in the country. So I've just seen a ton of things. You've seen the commercial, the insurance commercial. I've seen it. Well, I've been there. Because of that, just that breadth of experience in policing, in communication, not because the community wants to hear from me, they're not desiring of it. I'm just you have to. So you have to have that plan. Also, in just that area of communication, the one thing that I try to tell everybody is pre-planning, preparation will get you through most of it. Experience will get you through some, and then just putting your little nuances to things will put you through the rest. But I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences with you as we move forward. I'll keep it brief since we got 6 panelists here.
Awesome. My name is Tammy Williams. I'm chair of the Ed Leadership Department, but it's my 25th year in education. So classroom teacher, building administrator, district administrator, and supervisor, have been through a few crises and preparing leaders to be able to respond to those crises as well. So I have a very narrow, specific lane, which is that PK-12 space, and excited to be able to have that conversation.
Thank you. Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky Kern. I'm the Warning Coordination Meteorologist. I've been at the Valley office just west of here for 25 years now, worked my way up from the very bottom. Now I'm on upper management, and the previous panel was talking about before, during, and after, the 3 things, which the before is us forecasting the storm, preparing the people for what is about to happen, what we think is going to happen, communicating our uncertainty. And then during, it is all hands on deck, issuing tornado warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, and that sort of thing. And then after, we are boots on the ground. We are going door to door, assessing the damage, because we are expected to rate the tornado, get a length and a path, and that sort of thing. So we become structural engineers to some degree, as well as behavioral helpers, which I'm not formally educated in, but these are people that are at their worst. They've just experienced an extreme disaster, so I would love to talk to people about how to best do that when we're going door to door.
Awesome, thank you. Bill.
Yeah, I'm Bill O'Neill. I'm Executive Director of Strategic Communications at UNMC. I've been at UNMC for about 25 years. And so I guess to this panel, I bring some expertise in the healthcare realm, including some experiences in bringing Ebola patients to the United States and treating them in 2014 when maybe the general public wasn't real fond of us bringing that disease back to the U.S., and of course being on the front lines of the pandemic, including some repatriating some Americans from the Diamond Princess cruise ship in 2024, among the first patients that came back to the U.S. So, yeah.
Aaron, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Owen, and I've spent 30 years primarily being a storyteller, and crisis has been a huge part of my career, from United States Senate to NBC News to heading up comms for University of Nebraska at Omaha Go Mavs. And here at UNO, I had the privilege of working with teams of people to handle 30 plus very active crises. And now I own my own firm where I help organizations plan and also alongside them during crises.
I'm Jay Martin, Nebraska Department of Education, School Safety and Security Director. Before I took this position a couple years ago, I was actually teaching in Omaha Public Schools for a couple years, but before that I was actually in law enforcement. A lot like the chief mentioned, I was a PIO, Public Information Officer for them, dealing with being in actual school shootings and things of that nature, as well as weather events, forest fires to floods out in Colorado, where I was a deputy sheriff. As far as taking on this position, though, I go out and educate a lot of what was talked about in the first panel. We talk about prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. I really go out and talk to the communities about prevention and preparedness and what that looks like, and a lot of it is the communication piece, how we're communicating with our public as superintendents, principals, things of that nature. So that's really where my expertise comes from.
Excellent. Thank you all. So like I did with the last panel, I'm going to kind of start off with different people for each question. And this one I'm going to start actually with you, Aaron. This is a question that we actually started with the first panel as well. How would you define a risk or a crisis?
I would define it very simply. Anything that could jeopardize the reputation of the thing you care about. You, your organization, your mission, your work.
Other thoughts on that question? Go at it. How would you define a risk or a crisis?
Yeah, so I worked in a middle school and a high school, right? I mean, like, crisis can be anything that's on a spectrum. So the disruption to the regular day, anything that takes away that autonomy of safety for your students, for your family, for your faculty, that's a crisis. Could be a student death, could be an outside shooter, it could be a tornado happening at dismissal time. These are regular crises.
Other thoughts, please.
One that I have is the real or perceived. We deal with that a lot, I think more so with social media today, is the fact that a lot of stuff becomes a perceived thing that you have to address as opposed to something that's actually real. Again, being in the law enforcement perspective, you get that far too often. Again, I'll go back to the active shooter type thing. You get those calls all the time, and then what do you have? You have parents showing up at your doorstep at a school district, so what do you got to do, and how are you going to address that? So being prepared for those types of things.
Excellent. Becky, please.
We don't deal with crisis as much as we are preparing and during. And going to the school dismissal time. And I tell my people all the time, what keeps me up at night is a tornado during school dismissal time. We've seen it in Boys Town, and we had April 26th. I don't know if many of you were around, but it was a massive tornado outbreak, went through Elkhorn on Arbor Day. After that, on May 21st, we had another event, and some of the schools, especially in the metro area, were still in session. I bet I talked to your superintendents, and there are some very lovely, wonderful people that care about our students that called me. I probably talked to some of the major ones about 20 times that day on May 21st because they, believed or thought maybe that what happened on the 26th of April was going to happen on May 21st. And a lot of activities were going on at school dismissal time, or should I hold the kids? Should we keep them back? And the risk that they have with the children was huge, and we walked them through that. I was not on the forecast desk issuing warnings at that time because my job was to communicate with these planners on what they could do and what timing worked for everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you. Absolutely. Other thoughts on the panel?
Sorry, I think I would tend to align with Aaron. Anything that could affect the reputation of of UNMC. We do a lot of risk assessment, both in the communication area and then university-wide. And that could, range anything from the political climate to more communication-related topics.
I'll just summarize real quick. I do think the crisis starts at the reputational level and then ends at a crisis that at the highest level is public safety at risk? Is a tornado coming through the city of Omaha? Do you have an active shooter? Even a prolonged period of time event, such as the pandemic, or maybe you have a serial killer in the city. That's your highest level of crisis when public safety is at risk, but it starts at that reputational level. And in law enforcement, you will often see our reputation tied to our police community relations. So anything that strikes at that, damages it greatly, we start that off as a crisis.
Excellent, thank you. Next question I want to go to, and again, if you've got some, bring them to Cheryl, she'll bring them up to me. I'm going to start with Todd on this one, in particular because he just recently released a book on the intersection between basically first responders and police and the media, and how that conversation works. So tapping into that, what do you think would make an effective communication strategy, or makes an effective communication strategy?
First of all, you got to have a baseline communication strategy and a critical communication strategy, but I'm going to lay a little bit of a foundation, Adam. So over the course of 12 years, I've noticed in the criminal justice curriculum across this country, there was no instruction on police and the media, on how you communicate. And when I started as chief 12 years ago, I thought my primary job was going to be positioning the police department, assigning people where they needed to be, providing a strategic plan to reduce crime in a community. I quickly realized that it's not just police, courts, and corrections, it's police, courts, corrections, and the media. If you cannot relay what you're doing to the public on a critical instance, or lay your foundation for what your barometers of success are, others will provide that for you. And so communicating with the public, communicating with the media to reach the public is a huge staple, and probably one of your biggest barometers when you're looking for a major city chief. Can they communicate to the public in times of crisis? The two things that we do within the Omaha Police Department, each one has various levels to them, but just basically we have a basic communication plan to handle our day-to-day, to give out our performance expectations, because we want the public to know these are what we consider our barometers of success. Measure them with us. If we don't do that, others will provide measures of success, and one incident can derail all your reputation. And then the other layer to that, when we enter into a critical environment, a crisis environment, whether it's a prolonged period of time or a singular incident, we'll transition into a crisis communication plan. And the beauty of all these, it's flexible. So you have to make determinations when to exit that crisis plan, and when you're in that crisis plan, what means and mode of communication do you use? Is it a press release? Is it an interview? Is it a live press conference? Depending on the incident and depending on the area, you have to make those decisions. And to have both of those plans in place, layered, and known by your press information office and your top commanders is key to communicating in a large city.
Awesome, thank you. Becky, I see you nodding along with that.
I'm just thinking about how, we try to get ahead of the message, but communicating what risk people are currently at. We saw it with the Elkhorn tornado, and I apologize for those of you that aren't from here, but we did have an EF3 and 4 tornado, actually the EF4 tornado, go through one of our major metro areas on the western side of town. Now, the sirens sounded, people's phones went off for the entire metro area and greater. The risk was really for the people in the path of that tornado, but we have a degree of uncertainty that we have to communicate. So the people, sometimes in the middle part of the county weren't under a threat like we knew they were, if that makes any sense at all. In the meantime, we have a tornado developing on the eastern side of town, right over the Omaha Eppley Airport. So to communicate that the people in Elkhorn are going to get it worse than the people in the Midtown that are in shelter, is really difficult, and it's so fast-paced for us that we just have to alert everybody, and let people determine their risk. Yeah, where was I going with that? Oh, and then let's fast forward to July 31st, where we had a massive windstorm come through Lincoln and Omaha, and we knew there was going to be a windstorm. We just didn't know exactly where it was going to hit. And so we weren't able to get ahead of that messaging quite as early as we wanted to. It's not that we were wrong, it's just that we didn't give people as much heads up. It was the largest power outage that the local OPPD, the Public Power District, has ever had in history. And it covered such a widespread area. It was essentially a Category 2 hurricane that was here for about 20 to 30 minutes sustained. It did a lot of damage. And so you have this narrow area in the tornado example, but you have this widespread area, and just communicating, not all two events are the same. It's just the way it is. And I think a lot of people around this part of the country are really smart about weather and understand that, but we see things with the hurricanes and just what is the risk to me, in my family, in my house, and yeah.
I think of when I was growing up, and whenever we heard a tornado was coming through, we all went outside and watched. Because I'm from Minnesota, that's what we do. Blizzard, sure, let's see what's gonna happen. So but we pay attention to the weather. It's kind of what we do. Bill, I saw you kind of nodding along as well. I want to see what you.
And I don't want to get too long-winded here, but I think as we're thinking about crisis communication and how that's going to play out, I think building the relationships ahead of time across the board, and with that I mean we're pretty open with the news media, I think, as at UNMC, and have a lot of good relationships there. They know that we're going to shoot straight, that we're responsive. And then I think there's a lot of external audiences that may that may become a factor as you have a crisis situation. As a state-supported institution, that could include legislators or the governor or the Board of Regents or administration. And I think making sure that you have good relationships there, that there's a certain amount of trust there, so that when the incident command goes into place, and I see Bill and Austin back there, that structure, making sure that leadership has taken part in that as well and has practiced. We went through that some with the initial session, because if leadership's not all in there too, or part of those practice sessions, then when things are live, then that does you no good. So ensuring, I think a couple things, ensuring relationships, and then ensuring you've practiced that plan.
Thank you so much for that. Bill and Tammy, I'm hearing them all talk, and I'm thinking about your spaces, particularly in education. When you think of an effective communication strategy for an education space, you're coming from inside, you're coming from the state level. What do you want that to look like for other people who are principals, who are superintendents, whatever the case may be? What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think that we've got a lot of experts in that K-12 space. And so a lot of what we've talked about today is building everything on a foundation of trust. The phrase incident command comes from FEMA training, right? So that when you've got a crisis, you designate who is the incident commander, where is incident command being established. That is likely going to be at the district office. Those executive leaders are going to have a different burden of communication than the building principal. The building principal, the classroom teachers are the closest to the families, they are the closest to the students. So in your organization, who is most removed, that's a different communication strategy. Who is closest, that's a different communication strategy. When I'm a building principal, I'm face-to-face with families who are impacted, and the most important thing that they want to know is, where's my kiddo? How can I recover from this? And how can I keep being safe? We're going to be there, and we're going to tell them that. In the moment, all of our students are fragile. We're going to meet those needs. At the executive leadership space, they need to be removed. And then if the cameras come to my building as a building principal, I say things like, I want to be really helpful. My first concern is for my students right now, so I've got to direct you over to my communications specialist at the district office. Here's the contact. So at all times, showing helpfulness, showing compassion, and knowing those protocols, those can be implemented when you've spent an entire school year and school experience of building trust within your stakeholder community, which are your neighbors, your parents, your guardians, and of course your staff and extended families.
Thank you. Jay, any thoughts on that?
Ours is, what we kind of focus on a lot is, again, using our community partners, as was mentioned, UNL Public Policy Center. We just got done completing the risk messaging across the state. We worked with behavioral health regions across the state as well. So we're using all these different entities to give that same messaging across. So that was put out. You actually can see that on our NDE school safety webpage that's available to everybody in the state. But we also are trying to create that common language within the school districts. We use I Love You Guys Foundation, the SRP, Standard Response Protocol, making sure everybody's communicating the same way. So that way when these incidents do happen, say we got a group of kids that are in a football game or whatever at a different district, if everybody's using SRP and we end up going into a hold, everybody knows that's what's really going on, and they all can act accordingly. So having that common language, again, is key for anybody in any state to make sure that you, again, letting your public know this is how we're going to respond to this particular crisis going on.
Excellent, thank you. So Aaron, given the fact that you came out of really working for various entities and now you own your own company doing this kind of work, when you think of what an effective comm strategy is going to look like, I'm curious on a couple of perspectives. When you're inside working for a company, but now when you're doing client work, I feel like it might be a little different. So what are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing I do is I do an audit, and many of the clients I have the privilege of working with are nonprofits, and many of them are not prepped and ready for a crisis. So I have a template, crisis communications template, and then I start along the logistical pieces of being prepared. Timothy Combs, who's also a researcher in crisis, has 3 phases, and you're always in one of them. Pre-crisis is when you're preparing, looking around. Do you have a team with roles and responsibilities? If something were to happen right now, how would your organization respond? That's what you really need to be working on in pre-crisis. And then there's crisis, active crisis, and then there's post-crisis, where you do after-action debriefing, which was talked about in the first panel. And then in addition to that, there's also philosophies. You have to determine what's the tone of your organization. How do you like to, what is your leadership team like? Are they transparent and open and lean in? Or are they confidential and very quiet and very sequestered with information? You have to know how your leadership functions, because if your leadership team is in that more quiet, confidential mode, you have a lot of work to do. Because one of the key things is leaning in, being open, answering the phone. I love what Tammy said about I'd love to be helpful. I always say, when you answer the phone or you get caught on the phone or in person with media, with a smile on your face, thank you so much for calling. And then hear them out, but get them to the right person, of course, to the comms person. We would love to be helpful. Please give me your name and your number. Don't be scared. Lean in. And I also think this was something mentioned I think by Tim in the first session. And this is counterintuitive. A well-handled crisis can improve your brand and your reputation. Really, a crisis is a test of who you and your organization is, how you function, how you believe, what your mission and values are. So those are all of the things that I like to look at full circle: audit, getting prepared, backfilling on places where you're not prepared, training, and when it happens, I am alongside our clients to help them guide and figure out how to navigate.
Awesome, thank you so much for that. The next question I've got kind of came out of the conversation you all were having, and then we're going to get to one that's come in. And this kind of starts with Todd and Becky and Bill. And what I'm thinking about is during the weather event or a weather event, if there are three organizations that are probably going to have to work a little bit interconnected, it's going to be NOAA, it's going to be a hospital, the UNMC, and it's going to be first responders, and in this case, the police. What's the coordination like, or if there is a coordination system, what does it look like between the three of your entities when an event like that occurs?
I'll start. So leading up to April 26th, which was our big event, we have a conference call webinar with our primary partners. Now, who are those partners? They are NEMA, which is the Nebraska Emergency Management, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management, and we're all ICS trained as well, so we're all working on incident command structure. Our educational partners, our superintendents are part of that. All the local emergency managers, hospitals, roads department, public power departments, all the airports, all the things, players you can think of. We tell them what we know when we know it. I heard you guys say that on the previous panel. That is our motto at the Omaha Weather Service office. We tell people what we know when we know it. So we will send email blasts out leading up to a conference call. But once we have a conference call from our office, we mean business. And then from there, when it's happening, we are just focused on the right now, what is going on the ground. And so we're not in that element of crisis at that point. We're just doing our job, issuing the warnings to people. That's saving property and hopefully saving lives and protecting property.
Thoughts from the other two about that intersection between first responders and then healthcare, really is what I'm looking at there. So any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just touch on it. It's when something big like that happens, the tornado that may cause mass casualties, the public should know, and they should rest assured that it isn't our first rodeo. We've been working with each other numerous times all the way leading up to this. We understand the incident command system. We understand the transition of where everybody falls into line, what our lanes are, and we centralize that with one communication point. And so each entity will have one communications head, and all of it's coordinated in advance. If it's not coordinated in advance, people will die. It's really that simple. So you train for that, you prepare for that. And then, of course, in the area of the weather, you have oftentimes the advantage of some advance warning, and you heavily lean on the meteorologist and those experts in the field to try to guide what resource pileups you need to do. Because your resource allocation is going to be something huge as well, and it's hard to explain why you don't have that mounted up. So pre-planning is really key when you talk about those events that you possibly could pre-plan for.
I would just agree. And again, it comes down to practice, trust, and then previous relationships, I think. We have open communication with both the Weather Service and with the mayor's office and the police department and others.
What I'm hearing, like I did with the last panel, there's a couple of things I'm hearing. This idea of preparedness. Like, have the plan in advance. You don't jump in, like, oh, let's go. It's like, you've got to have something set up, right? I'm hearing this notion of transparency, which I really like. So I think a lot of folks don't realize that everything you all do is public knowledge. Like, it's pretty apparent what everyone does, yet no one seems to take the time to look. And so then it always becomes that conversation going on about, well, we didn't know. Well, you probably did. You just didn't take the 2 minutes. Kind of from the last session, the hard work. The easy work is just blow it off. The hard work is actually doing the work and looking into things. Which leads me to a thing that came up that I was scribbling down, and then we had a question come in about it as well. And it's going to lead to something that came up in the last panel also. We are right now witnessing in the Southeast this idea of the disinformation reality. Misinformation, of course, when you misinform. Disinformation is when you don't realize disinformation is like you are actively doing that. And like I said in the last panel, we don't know if it's a coordinated effort. We don't know if it's not, whatever the case may be. But we're hearing a lot about it in a way that we've probably not heard about it in media coverage before. What I'm curious to know is, how do you as practitioners handle that kind of thing? from the police office to, I mean, supposedly the government controls weather now. I mean, that's one thing that came up. And I'll just throw it out there, like, really? I wish. But how do you all handle this type of messaging when it comes out? Because it is actively working against the work you are trying to do every day. And I'll just throw it out there, whoever wants to jump in first. Jay, please.
I'm actually going around talking to school districts about digital stuff, in particular the misinformation, disinformation, and I get really kind of a deep dive. We get into the algorithms, how that actually operates and manipulates us, as well as the AI, and then talking to them again how the misinformation, disinformation exists. Does anybody in here like being wrong? Well, of course not. It's called confirmation bias. The reason why we keep clicking on something is because we never want to be wrong, and you're never going to be wrong because they got to keep you on that platform, and that's part of what leads to those echo chambers and things that were mentioned in the first panel. But I get into that whole thing. One of the things I actually use when I teach this is an actual body camera video of an officer, and I have everybody watch it, and I say, is this officer severely, moderately, or slightly threatened, and can he use force? Well, everybody watches it, and it was an actual study that was done. People think he was either severely or moderately threatened, and he probably could use force. And I said, well, it's based off what you see, hear, or feel, maybe about police officers, preconceived notions, things you were clicking on, those types of things. Well, then I go, the thing we got to do online now is we have to purposely, because about 70% of what we're seeing online is somebody else's vision of their truth. And it's based on your position, your perception, and your perspective. Well, I change your position, and then I show them a whole new position of that same video. The two people were dancing, but it looked like on the body cam video that they were punching and everything else. So the whole point behind that is we have to purposely go out and change our position online. Once you change your position online and see it in a different reality, same with our news and stuff, is understand you got to go out and try to disprove what you believe to be true, because unfortunately there's so much misinformation and disinformation that exists online today. So that's kind of the whole point behind all of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Aaron, please.
So I think about this a lot, which is why I'm really glad I came to the first panel. I think making sure that we know who audiences value, where they're getting their information, and making sure you have intentional relationship management strategies. I was talking to Angela Raber from Project Harmony about this idea that organizations mostly can't be partisan if you're serving the general public, a nonpartisan approach where you're meeting with and having relationships across the political spectrum. And I think ultimately building up trust and relationships across different belief systems, then when something happens, you can go back to that person to say, I have some evidence I'd like to show you. I'd like to hear what you're seeing so we could work together to clarify this. So my company, Clarity Channels Communications, if you look at my mission and vision, I truly believe that clear communications can make us safer and to make our communities stronger. So I'm always thinking about how do we clarify information? And we have some really tall tasks right now. One other item, I have a newsletter called the EO Report, and I just did a whole study bringing resources in about how you test misinformation. And one of the things that I do, and then I'll pass this on, when I read something, certainly have political beliefs of my own. And as a journalist in training, I'm always asking myself, how do I know that's right? Even though I believe it, and I like it, and I want it to be true, I then go and look at Wall Street Journal or Fox News, and I try and disprove, or at least see what the other side is looking at. And there's been some really interesting media maps showing, in theory, different types of approaches. And then I went through, the State Department recently said that the Russian government had at least 35 URLs that were sharing misinformation. And the US government stopped them, blocked them from coming into the country. And I went and I looked at 5 different news organizations on how they covered that news, and it was really interesting. The left was a little bananas, the far right was a little bananas, and in the middle, it was straight reporting of the news. So I think it's really interesting. I think we have to train our young people to be testing their theories and making sure that they're at least looking at it from another perspective to see if they pick up anything.
Any other thoughts on this question, on the idea of mis and disinformation, how you are handling it?
we've been in the practice of this for centuries. It all boils down to working with our core partners who are our voice at times. We do have our social media accounts where we have to interact with the public at times. It used to be a one-way information where we just provided information, but now it seems to be two-way. There are people in our agency that struggle with that, but our advice to them is just don't engage with it. But engage with your partners. Make sure that they're getting their sources of information from the right sources. They spread out the message and they help the whole chain of misinformation. And that's where we've been for years.
Thank you. Jay, do you have a thought? Oh, not Jay, sorry, Bill. You're looking this.
Whatever you want, Adam. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. I would just start with, honestly, this is a really difficult subject, and it is because it's hard to know how much to respond and how much to engage. We during the pandemic, certainly UNMC Nebraska Medicine were leaders, were thought leaders on infectious disease and the COVID vaccine. And so we got a lot of responses on social media and to our website and to others of a lot of proof that the information that we were providing was wrong. And so I think it does come down to you lead with compassion. You try to understand what others may be hearing or why they may believe what they believe. I think it's important to acknowledge in a live situation, know that that is inaccurate fact. But when it comes to social, that's really hard when you've got 7,000 messages that say you're full of crap and now it's been shared and all of this. And so I would just, I really appreciate the conversation and everyone's perspective here and the panel before. But I'll just say, and I hope if you're sitting where you're sitting today, I don't have the answer to this. I mean, it's difficult, and there's a lot of gray area about how much to respond and how appropriately to respond to a lot of the noise.
Todd.
I would say, in the political climate, we see a lot of disinformation, and it's damaging. But disinformation can be on purpose, or it can be because you're not prepared. If you're a government entity, if you're a law enforcement agency, and you are putting out disinformation or you are caught in some type of lie, your credibility is now done. You have now erased all credibility, and why would anybody trust what you're going to do? Let me give you an acronym that I've come up with that I give some of my new commanders when we're out talking. It's called TRUST. T, always tell the truth. R, always do your research. Know what you are going to talk about, what's going on. U, understand your audience. You got to know who your audience is while you're speaking to them, because audiences can take on different silos depending on what your subject is. S is stay on point. When you are attacked by the media, and I say attacked because they'll throw questions at you, you got to stay on point, otherwise you'll lose track of what your focus is. And the last one is T for timeliness. Communication is only effective if it's timely to the situation at hand. I could communicate with you the next day about a tornado. What would be the point? So timeliness is also important. Thanks, Adam.
Well, thank you. You need to teach the class for CJ on how to do comm. I think that would be perfect. Unless someone's got another response or a thought, I want to kind of move on here. We're good? All right. I want to go back to Becky with this one. And this is a two-parter for everyone. What are the big concerns in your offices and professions right now? Like when it comes to communication, when it comes to risk crisis events, what are your concerns and how are you working to resolve those concerns? What are your action plans to resolve those things? So Becky, you can start, please.
As we get toward winter, there are a lot of armchair meteorologists, maybe some with experience, maybe some without, and they can post whatever they want. Some are retirees that have tens of thousands of followers, and they'll post one thing and it's shared, how it just goes viral. We stick to the facts, And we try to remain, and I hope we remain, the trusted source of information. Especially to us, it's not necessarily, our audience isn't necessarily the public, but it's our partners, our superintendents, what they're seeing on social media. You know, are they thinking about closing school down based on what they saw on, you know, this armchair meteorologist that lives in his basement now? Are they trusting that source? Well, if, like you guys talked about in the previous panel, they've seen it not work out, right? But that's because it was a forecast 15 days from now, which you're never going to see from my office. Never going to see anything beyond 7 days. And so just to educate our partners in that realm, for the people who make the big decisions, that's where our communications are. And trying to get the new meteorologists, you know, not to get wrapped up in said misinformation or what they see out there, but just to keep the focus on our mission. And it's really not hard. Our people are very, very passionate about what they do.
I only giggled because I think I know a few of those armchair people who are trying to predict the weather based on like when they're doing this. And so, yeah, so that's, again, like, yep, I know those folks. So other thoughts, what are your biggest concerns coming out of your offices or your professions right now, and how are you working to kind of resolve those concerns?
Coming from a practitioner standpoint, in a PK-12 space, the job keeps getting a little bit more broad. And so my perspective would be that the biggest issue right now is balancing the mitigation of crises and the before pieces, knowing then that a thin slice of folks need to have a little bit more of that unexpected training for, you know, like incident command type thinking. You know, we come from a service-oriented environment, and so when we can focus on balancing the mental health needs of students, the support for behavioral health, the support of systems of response, that's going to be where the focus is, in addition to knowing how to handle traffic when the one-way changes, or, you know, all those little things like that.
So I'm hearing over and over again this idea of advanced work. Make sure you've got the plan in place. Make sure you are thinking about things. Make sure you're laying the groundwork, right? A couple of you have talked about laying the groundwork for a year of, you know, for trust over a year, just in the moment when an event might occur. So I'm kind of hearing that come across here as well. Other thoughts on what you're concerned about right now in your offices, what you might want to, we're working on? Yeah.
I think I would also throw in making sure people understand what a crisis is. You don't know what you don't know, and I have watched some organizations, very good organizations, watch an occurrence happen as if it's like a normal part of the day when really they've already entered active crisis. So from my perspective, making sure the people I work with or other nonprofits really understand when you should start sitting a little bit upright and getting your team pulled together to look something over.
Becky, please.
I do have another thing to add from a wider National Weather Service perspective. We are in a time where we must communicate impacts to citizens, and especially our emergency managers. What are the impacts that we are expecting? That comes with a lot of uncertainty. I don't know what the road crews are. I talked to the road crews. I hope they're preemptive and putting salt down, or I hope, you know, the sandbags are already in position, and then that's what we are helping them plan for. But the impacts, we don't necessarily know all the impacts. Let's take North Carolina, for example. They had a 1,000-year flood. This is something their ancestors that go down the lineage have never seen before. How do you communicate this is something you've never seen at the risk of maybe not being super confident? We call it forecaster confidence. How confident are you that this is going to hit Omaha, that this is going to mow down part of our metro area? And just providing that degree of confidence. I work at the College World Series with some of Chief's staff. trying to keep the citizens down around the College World Series safe. And I'm looking for lightning strikes. I'm looking, and Captain Deschler, he asked me, how do I know when you're like really worried? Like, because I just kind of sit there studying my stuff, and he's like, can you give me some sort of cue that I need to let my people know? And I said, just trust me. I'm not going to get super excited, but you're going to know. I'm going to let you know. Don't leave. But that body language, that human interaction, me sitting next to Captain, who is responsible for everyone, outside of the stadium, for their safety, just me being at the incident command center. And that's what we do now. We're at the Super Bowl. We're at all the big events, even little events, just next to people communicating.
So the next question I've got here is, let's see here, how do I want to go? Yeah, we'll go this way. We've been talking about the different things you all do at different points. So I just want to start actually with Todd and kind of go straight down the line here. Since we've discussed the idea of pre and post, what do you think the most important things to think about are before, during, and after an event? From whatever perspective you're coming from, what are the most important things to be thinking about before, during, and after? I'll start with you, Todd.
Sure. So before, you want to set your expectations. You want to manage expectations. I think if you ask me what the hardest thing about being a leader is, maybe a police chief, managing expectations. It's a large population certainty. When you have 1 million metropolitan area, things are going to happen. And so when those things happen, they have to be just, and the public has to know, okay, this is going to happen from now and then. If not, it looks like a failure every time you turn the TV on. So you have to manage expectations. What is population certainty that things will going to happen, and what is a real crisis? And so that's the first thing. And then during, when you identify that crisis, you really have to triage what are your top priorities. Preservation of life, obviously the first priority. And then you move downward from there. And you keep your talking points to the public always centered around your top priority first, and then layer it downward. And then afterward, what do we want to do to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And what we try to do is, at least when you have a chronic problem, at least come at it from 3 different angles. You're never going to address a chronic problem with just one solution. You have to come at it from 3 different angles. And we try to come up with a plan to the public to say, look, this occurred. We recognize it's a problem. And to prevent it from occurring again, we're going to do A, B, and C. And so we try to take that layered approach, Adam, when we have big crises.
I think know your protocol. So in a crisis, our brains aren't going to work. So have it on a quick sheet, that you can pull it out and go back and remind yourself, what is my protocol? What am I supposed to be doing in this spot? Stay in your lane and figure out or be cognizant of that emotional wake. As the leader, you are the face of that situation, and so modulate your voice tone, pay attention to your facial expressions, and if you need to, take a deep breath and take it down a bit. And then lastly and most important, lead with compassion, as was stated, if I could just reinforce. We're in a people business, and so when we can say truthful, honest, heartfelt, sincere items, we want to make sure to say those things.
I was thinking about having it written down. I'm seeing the emergency protocols hanging in every space around here. We all have them around. I mean, it seems like you just walk by and don't realize they're there, but they're there. So yeah, when you said, I was like, yeah, there they are. So Becky, please.
Little internal information here. We train like airline pilots do in flight simulators. We have warning simulators, and our forecasters, we train for the big one, right? What nobody trained us on, and we found this out this year, was nobody trained us for the big one that's over your family and your home. That was another level of, we were usually prepared for everything. We've seen it all with weather. We react to, and our training, we go back to muscle memory when it comes to warnings and seeing storms and what to do and when. But we weren't prepared quite necessarily for my family's right under the circulation here, as is my house. I need, that was just a whole nother level of something that became a crisis for us. And then we have to continue our job not knowing what's left, right? And so that was just a little bit of internal information.
Bill, please.
I think, just adding on a little bit, prior to an event, ensuring everyone understands the mission, understands the why, so that you're always leading with this is why we're here, this is what we're doing. And I think during making sure that you're the source of information is important to us. Being able to say, I don't know, but I'll get you that, saying we're going to have an update at 2 p.m., we're going to update when we had an Ebola patient here, we had a daily update, because if you don't do that, and I'd be interested to hear some of Aaron's experiences with clients who are more to the vest, if you will, but if you don't do that, the vacuum gets filled with inaccuracies, and people are out searching for the news. So I think making sure that you remain the source of information.
Love what everyone has said. In the pre-phase, I would make sure that your team is aligned. If there's any relationships within the core team that need to be healed or addressed, you don't have to like each other, but you sure do need to respect each other and be able to come together and work as a solid team, assuming a plan is in place. And also what Bill just said is another item. Look at a crisis through the lens of your mission. That is your guide. For example, when UNO had a residence hall fire in February of 2014, 10 years ago, we used here at UNO Students First. It's a student first mission. And we were able to use that on all of our decisions. Should we buy new books and give everyone a $200 gift card to the bookstore because they don't have shoes on their feet? Yes. We didn't know how we were going to pay for it, but it was students first. So making sure your mission is well understood, like Bill just said, and applying that to a crisis. In a crisis, my number one thing would be make sure you understand what has happened. You have to be an investigative reporter. Make sure you have all the details, because if you think you know, but you actually don't have it quite right, you start going down the wrong path and you start losing people. So you have to get out, work your networks, and figure out everything that's happening and be timely. And on the end, I would say make sure and celebrate with your team whatever had gone well. Make sure and celebrate with that team. And then look for opportunities to say, what could we have done better?
Thank you. Jay.
Again, coming from Nebraska Department of Education, it's not surprising. I'm going to say education. If you go out and do some prevention and preparedness to your communities, and it's obviously very different from Omaha to Lincoln to our rural areas in the middle of Nebraska. It's going to be obviously a different message you're probably going to have, knowing your local communities. So that's going to be on the front end, making sure you're doing all you can to communicate everything so you are prepared when those things do happen. So when you're in the actual live, you can actually be that calm message that's going to be coming across. If you're not prepared and you haven't done those steps up front, you're not going to be prepared, and you're going to fall into the things that you were just mentioning, where you're not being able to provide that message that you need to provide. Lastly, obviously, it's been mentioned several times, compassion, empathy, and the back end. You got to have that, making sure that you're doing all the follow-up. It's not a one and done, clear back to the education part. You got to keep re-educating, doing the prevention. When you're giving that calm message, it's a calm message, yes, and it's a timely message, but again, you got to have some follow-up down the line in your response to let the community know that you're still thinking about this. It's still in our minds. We still are doing some other things. Again, we've learned from our mistakes. We've learned what we need to improve on, and again, celebrating what we've done well as also on that back end. But again, always having those, as much preparedness as you can do, that's going to save you in the long run. And again, just being able to, again, make it more like it's a casual conversation when you are talking to the public and letting them know that you care and you're a part of this. If you can't convey that, you really should never be in front of the camera, period.
Speaking of cameras, and thank you for that, I want to end with a question we got from the first panel. It says, please also ask during the other panel. So I'm going to. I'm going to start with you on this one, Aaron. What are 3 tips you can give to a new spokesperson who is about to go in front of the camera during a crisis?
The first is sit next to someone who will give you the microphone. No, this isn't about you. You are a vehicle. Try and get out of yourself. You are sharing a message for whoever you represent. So, think about, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who needs the information that you have. Come at it from their perspective. In Nebraska, we have a lot of modesty and we don't like the attention and this is not about you. Take a deep breath, trust your gut. And one of the things, when I went through media training, 1 month before the UNO fire, we had 30 subject matter experts at UNO go through media training. It's like the luck of the Irish. And I went first to make sure people could see what it looked like. I was told to put my hands in my pockets because I talk with my hands a lot. And if a camera is on you and your hand or your finger is flying through the scene, so during this fire, when I was the spokesperson with the entire Omaha media in front of me, I'm jamming my hands in my pockets. So you don't want anything to interrupt your message. Stay calm, take a deep breath, and understand people need the information that you have.
3 things the rest of you can think about. Someone's going in front of the camera for the first time. What are 3 things you're going to have them think about? Becky.
We stay in our lane. We only talk about what we know. If there's something that, rogue that gets thrown our way and we don't know, we just simply say, I don't know. We can look into it. We'll ask questions and get back to you. But we don't just start talking off the cuff about things we don't know.
Any other thoughts on this question? 3 things. Todd.
I would say this. I mean, it might look easy, but appear in front of 20 cameras for a live audience, and you could get thrown off right away. So have a way not to get thrown off, and that is you have your plan. And then when you walk out there, be prepared as to what you're going to see. And what I like to do is I like to speak to the reporters themselves. So if I see 20 people in that room, I'm speaking to those reporters, and that way I'm reaching the entire broader audience. If you go out there and you see all these cameras looking at you, you can have that moment of, uh-oh, 500,000 people are watching me. Focus just on the people in the room and execute your plan. And then also alter your demeanor and your speaking ability based on what your audience is for that particular forum. This panel here is excellent with, they're all excellent speakers, but Tammy and Aaron, look how they speak. Very professional, very calm. I wish I had 900 officers that spoke like them because they relay this message to the public that gets you to what you want to see. You could say all the right things, but if you don't know how to deliver it, your message is done for. And so that's more than 3, but you got 4 or 5 tips there.
I'll take it. Awesome. We are at time. Panelists, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. Please thank them.